strong believer in multilateral process. So I think the negotiation in the UNFCCC sometimes could be going nowhere, or they seem like they're not going or moving to some direction. But I believe that the multilateral process, which I think the UNFCCC is in guiding national efforts of countries, is the first, at least it could be one of the places where countries could get guidance, and that guidance could help countries in framing their strategies, so that when we tackle climate change, there is an informed understanding of what countries can do together, but also more on the national focus. And for that, if strategies are attached to a certain goal, like for example in Paris, there's a set goal of temperature goal, and if that's linked to a national efforts and national policies, and if a country is at least progressing towards achieving that target, then that could raise ambition. So I see the link between national efforts, multilateral process, and the link to the frameworks itself. I feel that, or I understand the UNFCCC nationally determined contributions are more focused on countries' efforts or contributions from the different sectors or different gases they might need to contribute, but also UN NDC should also be based on equity, because this is very important to African countries, taking into account our very negligible contribution to climate change. So NDCs should be based on equity and also the principles of the convention, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which are historical responsibility, common but differentiated responsibility. It's good that countries are aiming to achieve more, having a progressive NDCs, but there has to be a consideration of equity, discussion of historical responsibility, because this is also a discussion that we need to have in a parallel way, even if we promote ambition and we're taking more action as African countries, but there has to be equity consideration. And equity consideration does not mean we're taking less ambition or we're not doing our part. We're actually doing more part as African countries. But equity needs to be understood in their NDCs and try to justify, even if this is a case that we're not really contributed to in the past, we're doing more to address it. So there has to be additional consideration of where countries other than African countries can come and support our NDCs. So a narrative on equity and a narrative on how we can operationalize that, narrative on equitable access to sustainable development, because we also need to have a narrative of sustainable development in our NDC, not only ambition, not only action, but also a holistic view where we also eradicate poverty, where we promote sustainable development. I think most African countries have indicated NDC could also be an opportunity, right? If we're doing the development path greener, it could also be cost effective. So it's about identifying key natural resources that could actually help in reducing emission. I used to work with the government of Ethiopia, so I know the NDC of the country. For that, the country has chosen to do renewable energy, which is a key component in reducing emission, but also long-term have a cost-effective opportunity. The initial investment could be a bit high, but once it's invested, then the overall cost or the long-term cost is much more or less. So it's really about African countries identifying which sectors is more beneficial, at the same time reducing their emissions.